Welcome back, everyone. Dan Vega here, and today we're going to be talking about Rest Client support for OAuth2 in Spring Security 6.4. Now, if you've been following this channel, you know I'm a huge fan of the Rest Client. This is the new HTTP client that was introduced in Spring Framework 6.1, Spring Boot 3.2, and it provides us this nice fluent API. It's easy to use, similar to that of the web client, but it is synchronous and does not require bringing in those reactive library dependencies. So I've been a big fan of this. If you're interested in that, I'll leave some links to some videos in the description below. Now, after posting all of those videos and all of the content that I do that includes the REST client, one of the questions that I received the most was, this is great, but how do I use OAuth2 with this REST client? Because with the web client, it was fairly simple. There were directions in documentation on how to do this, but it was a little bit like, how do I do this with the REST client? Now, you could write your own interceptor, and I believe on one of the GitHub issues, that was the main recommendation for that. But this has been improved in Spring Security 6.4, which is not out yet. If you want to take advantage of this as we go through the tutorial, you got to use the latest RC of Spring Boot 3.4, which brings in Spring Security 6.4. This will be out later this month as I record this. So what I want to do is switch over here to my screen. This is the blog post that came out this week or last week as it is. REST client support for OAuth2 in Spring Security 6.4. There's a little bit of an introduction, how in 6.2 and 6.3 they've steadily improved configurations for application using OAuth2 client, so it talks through that. And then in Spring Security 6.4, focused on improving the REST client. So this is great to see. You can go get a brief introduction of OAuth2, how to make protected resources requests with the REST client. So it comes in here. This is kind of the bits that is important when you're setting up a REST client. You provided this interceptor that the framework is now providing for you. And then when you go ahead to make a call with the REST client, you can provide this attributes method. And then basically you're saying, here is the client registration ID. This is what is going to authenticate with an authorization server. And once that happens, this will all kind of work out. So I put together a nice little demo on this. So I'm calling this a golf scheduler. Just I like golf and this seemed appropriate. And you can go into this repo. We're going to build this out together, at least like build the project out, kind of build the different apps out, and then I'll paste some code in for brevity. But yeah, we'll get through a lot of this. So there's really three main components, four if you count like the two client apps, but I'm just calling them one. They're two projects, but yeah. So the authorization server, this is what handles authentication and issues our OAuth tokens. The resource server, this is providing that protected resource. Whatever that protected resource is in your organization, this is at the resource level. And then from a client application, we have an OAuth2 client. So this is the one that is making the secure call. And then there's a No-Auth client, just to kind of show the other side of this. If we're not implementing OAuth2, what happens? And so here's a nice diagram of the architecture. We have our client application. This is this one in this case. It will go ahead and make an OAuth2 token request to the authorization server. The authorization server issues a token back. And now when the client calls the resource server, it will go ahead and validate with authorization server that that is indeed a valid JWT token in this case, and returns the protected resource to the client. In the case of the No-Auth client, it will try to access the protected resource on the resource server. It does not validate with the authorization server, so that'll come back with a 401 unauthorized. So you can go ahead and read through the GitHub repository or check out the code. I will leave a link to this in the description below. But what we are going to do is we are going to start this from scratch. Normally I would go over to start.spring.io, but I'm going to use my IDE first today. And I get a lot of comments of like, hey, why don't you just create it within the IDE? And part of that is because I know not everybody is using IntelliJ Ultimate Edition, so they can't do that. So that's why I normally start at start.spring.io, so everybody's on the same playing field. But in this case, I'm going to start from the IDE because we're going to create a multi-module Maven project. And this will allow us to create a base project and then add all of these different applications into that same project. And that's how we have this one repo that you can go ahead and download and run. So with that, I'm going to head over to IntelliJ. And what are we waiting for? Let's write some code. All right, so here I am in IntelliJ. I'm creating a new project. So I'm going to start with a new Java project. We're going to start with Maven. I'm calling it the Golf Scheduler, although we're not really scheduling anything. It's just providing a lessons endpoint, but I think this will suffice. So we have our group ID, Golf Academy, and our artifact, which is Golf Scheduler. So this is just the root project. This is how you create a multi-module Maven project. So the Maven project is really like an empty Maven project, and then we'll include multiple modules in that. So I go ahead and create that. Let's see, we're going to open that in a new window. Let's go ahead and full screen this. And there we are. So now we're in the main project, which is Golf Scheduler. So one thing we want to do here is we want to go ahead and say that this is going to be packaging POM. And then what we can do is we can go ahead and add our modules in here as we add them. All right, and this is where we're going to create our module. So this is going to be our individual Spring applications. We'll start with the authorization server. So I will go ahead and call this authorization server. This is actually going to be a Spring Boot project. Sorry about that. Authorization server. This will use Maven. Here's our group, our artifact. I'm going to pick Java 23, and then we need to go ahead and pick our dependencies. For the authorization server, we need the OAuth2 authorization server, so we'll choose that. And then we'll also choose the Spring Security dependency as well. So with that, we have enough to go ahead and create this project. I'll go ahead and just say that we have our first module here, which is the authorization server. And then in the authorization server, we'll have to write a little code. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and rename these. I've been using YAML more. It's just easier on some of these larger projects. So I'm going to start with an application.yaml. For the authorization server, some of this code I'm going to just copy and paste in so we're not here all day, and I'll walk through it. So the first thing we're doing is we're saying, hey, this is the authorization server. This is the issuer, which is localhost 9000, and this application is going to run on port 9000. Then what we're going to need is a authorization server configuration. So here in Java, let's go ahead and say new Java class, authorization server config, and let's go ahead and paste some code in here and talk about it. So the first thing that we do is we basically set up a list of registered clients. So this registered client repository is defining all of the clients that can use this authorization server. So instead of just opening the floodgates to anyone, we are basically registering each of our clients. And these are going to be the downstream applications that are talking to our authorization server. In this case, we're only going to have one, and that is going to be with a client ID of Golf Client. And we're just encoding a raw password here of Golf Secrets. There are some things that you should do in a production environment, but this will work for this demo. So we set that up, and then we set up our security filter chain. So again, we've included Spring Security, so we want to kind of override the default security. And we're saying, hey, this is an OAuth2 authorization server configuration. Apply that default security and return form login for this. So that's it from an authorization server standpoint. Now what we can do is build out the resource server. So again, the resource server is the one that is going to contain the resources that we are trying to protect. So we're going to create a new module. We're going to call this the resource server. Again, we're going to use Maven and we're going to use JDK23, and then we need to go ahead and pick our dependencies. So from a dependency standpoint, we will choose the OAuth2 resource server. So I'll select that. We're also going to include web because we will do a couple things with web there, basically setting up like a REST endpoint. And then we'll also bring in Spring Security. So let's go ahead and choose that. And that looks good. So I'll go ahead and create that project. And then like we did with the authorization server, I will start with some YAML. So let's go in here into source main resources, and let's refactor this. We'll rename this to YAML, and I will copy this. And let's paste this in and talk about it. So we're setting up a resource server. And what we're doing is we're saying that for JWT, here is the issuer URI. And again, we just set that up as the resource server. So this is running on port 9000. And I put a comment in here, the issuer URI configuration in Spring Boot Security OAuth2 resource server settings specifies the URI of the OpenID Connect provider, also known as the authorization server, that issues the JWT tokens. So that we are setting, and then we are running this on a different port because ultimately the client application that we run will run on 8080. So this needs to run on a different port. Great. So that's kind of the first piece of that puzzle. The next thing is, just like the last one, because we're including Spring Security, we want to go ahead and set up some configuration for Spring Security. So I'll say this is our resource server config. You can call it whatever you want. As long as you add those annotations there, like configuration, this now makes it a configuration class. So we're overriding the default. We're providing a security filter chain here. We're saying any request that comes into this resource server, you must be authenticated. These are our protected assets. You have to be authenticated to request them. And what we're going to do for that is we're going to use OAuth2 resource server, and we're using JWT. So that's all from a security configuration that you need to have. Next, what we'll do is we'll come in here and create a new package. We'll call this lesson. I'll create a new class in here. So let's say new Java class lesson. And this Java class is really just going to be kind of holding the data for our lesson. This could probably be a record too, but I just have it a little bit more verbose here. So we have a title, a description, an instructor, and a schedule. We'll introduce some sample data for those lessons in our controller. So let's just say we have a lessons controller. And again, this is going to be the REST API that other clients try to access that provides the lessons. So what this looks like is a get mapping to /lessons. So remember, we've defined this on 8081. So if you want to contact this, you will go localhost 8081/lessons. And then what you'll get back is a list of lessons. And we just kind of stuck 2 in memory in there. So here's a new lesson, Beginner Golf Basics, and then another lesson called Advanced Swing Techniques. So we have 2 lessons that will be returned. So with that, we have 2 services running, 2 services there, not running. One of the things I love everything about IntelliJ Ultimate Edition, but one of the things I really love is when I'm working with multiple services like this, we have this services window, and we can come in here and say, hey, I want you to go ahead and run these services for me. So what I'll do is I'll just start this one up, and then it'll kind of recognize that. So if I come in here and go here and run this, it'll say, hey, did you know that you can run these from the services panel? Oh, that is already in use. So I have another application behind the scenes running. Let's try that again. And that should be running. So now if we go back over to the services panel, all right, there is our Spring Boot. So we have our authorization server application and then our resource server. So you can come in and run these individually, but both of those are started. You can actually come in here and like run all of these at the same time, and it will start all of them up. So again, when you have multiple services, this is a big help. All right, so we're almost there. We have our authorization server, our resource server. We're going to introduce a client. The client is the application that is talking to our resource server. So we got to figure out, what do we want to include in this client? What is it trying to do? And then we'll take a look at an example of a no-auth client. So I'm going to create a new module. And again, this is going to be a Spring Boot app. We'll call this the client application. This is going to use Maven. This is going to use JDK 23. And then from a dependency standpoint, we're going to use Spring Web because we're going to use the Rest client. We're also going to choose the OAuth2 client support. This will, again, integration for Spring Security's OAuth2/OpenID Connect client features. That's what we want. And then I believe, so the OAuth2 client will bring in security for us, so we don't need that. So now the only difference here is we want to use Spring Boot, the latest version, the latest RC1, so that we pick up Spring Security 6.4. So I'm going to come in here and choose RC1, and that should give us everything that we need to make this happen. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is come into resources, and we will refactor this and rename this to YAML. And I will paste some config in here. So here's our client application. For Spring Security OAuth2 client, we are registering this as a client. The name of this is Golf Client. Here's the provider. So the provider is, how do we go out and get a token? And remember, the authorization server is set up on port 9000. This is the URI that you would want to use to get a token at. So here's the provider. The client ID is our Golf Client, because remember, we kind of configured that in the authorization server, that this is a client that is allowed to talk to the authorization server. Here's our secret, here's our authorization grant type, and here is our scope. So from a client perspective, kind of setting it up, that is really all we need. Now, we need some security configuration. As I said, when we bring in the OAuth2 client, Spring Security is there. Spring Security is on the class path. We need to override that main security configuration. If you don't, I missed this the first time I was doing this, and I just kept getting redirected to the form login because that's kind of what we set up as the default. And I couldn't figure out why, and it's because I need to override that. So I'm going to say this is my security config, and all we're going to do here is do a couple of things. So let me get this out of the way. Disable form login. By not configuring form-based login, you prevent the application from redirecting unauthenticated requests to a login page. We are basically permitting all resources. Again, this is the client app, not the resource server, not the authorization app. And then we're disabling CSRF protection. It's not appropriate for non-browser clients. So that's what we're doing from a security perspective. Next, what we need to do is define a REST client. We could do this in its own config, or we can actually pop over here into this client application. And this is kind of the new bits, right? Remember I said you could do this at a REST client interceptor by yourself. So I've seen people create their own interceptor classes. Now we kind of get one from the framework called the OAuth2 client HTTP request interceptor, and we're passing that in there. So wherever we use the REST client in our application now, this is going to help us make that OAuth2 call. So with that, I need a simple controller on this end that I can basically invoke and call out to my resource server to get those lessons. So I'm going to create a lessons controller here. And we will go ahead and paste some code in here. And then I'm going to get the REST client. We've already configured that. So this will get auto-wired in through constructor injection. Then when I hit /lessons at this client app, which is running on 8080, we're going to make a call out to localhost 8081. That's our resource server /lessons. Now, again, I am hard coding some URIs in here, some URLs. Don't do that. We can do better than that, but I felt like this was starting to get long as it is, so here we are. Here's the key part. You can do all this before, you can retrieve, you can body. Now you can add this dot attributes. And what we're doing in here is we're saying we're providing our client registration ID as golf client, because again, that's one of the clients we've registered in the authorization server. So this looks pretty good. I think we are close to being done here. So let's go ahead and go back to our services panel, and we see our client app in there. Let's go ahead and see if we can start that. And now with all three of these running, I could basically make a call to 8081, and that should not work, right? Just on its own, me from a terminal calling localhost to 8081/lessons should give me an error like 401 unauthorized. So let's try that. And yeah, so now we're getting a deny, authenticate, bearer. We are not authorized to view this resource. But if we make the call to localhost 8080, now this will go ahead and authenticate with the authorization server, get a token, pass that token along to the resource server. The resource server asks the authorization server if this is a valid JWT token. It is. Go ahead and access this resource, or at least that's the plan. And there it is. So we got the information from the resource server. Whew, this worked out really nice. Now I want to show you one more thing, just because I thought it was important to kind of include in this. I'm going to create one more application called the No-Auth client. Again, we've seen calling the client from the terminal to just 8081 without the OAuth stuff, we get a deny. But I thought it'd be nice to just kind of show this off as well. So I'm going to create one more application here. Let's say new module. We will call this the No-Auth client. Again, this is going to be Maven, JDK 23. We're going to choose web for this. That's really all we need, because all we're going to do is create a simple controller class that calls out to this, but it won't use the attributes to pass along. And again, even if we did use the attributes, this isn't a registered client, so it would not work. But I thought it'd be nice to show off just a couple of things here. So I'm going to create a new lessons controller here and paste this in. So what we're doing here, when we build the REST client, I'm setting the base URL to localhost 8081. But I'm also setting a default status handler here, because if we make a call out to 8081, it's going to deny us, right? It's going to send back a 401 unauthorized. And so we want to catch that here in the REST client. And what do we want to do with it? We just want to throw a new response status exception, basically saying unauthorized, you cannot access the lessons API. And then we're calling just localhost 8081/lessons here. And actually, you don't even need this, right? So we just need that because we have the base URL here. And then I think we just need to set a different port for this one, because again, if we try and start this on 8080, it won't work. We already have something running on 8080. But this should go ahead and do that. And now we'll set this to 8085. So now, last but not least, let's go down here and let's run our application, No-Auth client application. So now what I want to do is hit localhost 8085/lessons. So 8085/lessons. And then you can see we are now getting that 401. We can get the actual error from the error handling in the REST client that says unauthorized. You cannot access path/lessons. The status code is 401. Whew, that was a lot. Not gonna lie, a lot of moving parts going on there. Again, going back to the architecture diagram that is in the GitHub repository, once you kind of understand everyone's part in this system, it makes a little bit more sense. And this is a really good starting point for building out like secure applications using OAuth2, using Spring Security, and now being able to use the REST client just by adding that interceptor and that attributes call, giving it the client ID. So this was a lot of fun putting together. I hope that you learned something new today. I hope that this made sense. Again, because I know there's a lot of moving parts, but you have the GitHub repository to go through now. You can download that. You can run all of the applications and kind of see how that works and play with some things there. So if you have questions about that, please do me a favor and leave them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to get to those. But again, I hope you learned something new today. I did. I had some fun putting this together. If you did, do me a quick favor, friends. Leave me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and as always, happy coding.